The invitation. There's a story that circles the darkest corners of the internet, whispered among those who have made the mistake of searching for something too obscure, too forbidden. Some say it's just an urban legend, others claim it's a true account, a warning for those who dare to tread too close to things they don't understand. And now, somehow you've found yourself here. You've clicked on this video and you are about to hear the story of the Airbnb of the Undead. Before we continue, a word of caution. Once you finish hearing this, you may wish you had never started. But now you're already in too deep. Someone is listening. They're always listening. For those who are brave enough to continue, I ask that you subscribe to this channel before it's too late. Because the more you listen, the more you might feel that something has shifted. And you'll want to keep hearing more to find out if anyone else survived. To see if there's any hope of escape. Let's begin. But remember, you were warned. It started like any other vacation. A secluded cabin deep in the forest, miles away from civilization. Perfect for a weekend getaway. No distractions, no noise, just nature and the quiet hum of isolation. It seemed like the kind of place you could finally escape to leave behind the stress, the mundane horrors of modern life and embrace peace. It was an offer you couldn't refuse and you didn't. The listing on Airbnb was eerily perfect, too perfect. A rustic cabin, adorned with charming wooden beams and surrounded by trees that seemed to stretch forever into the horizon. The pictures promised warmth, tranquility, and something else, something that couldn't be placed. It almost felt too much like a dream. But it was a dream you thought you could control. You knew deep down that the forest was vast and untamed. A place untouched by human hands, where the silence felt unnatural, but that only added to its appeal. The reviews were glowing, almost too glowing. But you weren't looking for red flags. Not this time. The host, an elderly woman named Madeline, had sent you a message just before your arrival. The cabin is old, has a history, but I've kept it well. Please treat it with respect and it will treat you kindly. Don't be afraid of the dark, dear. It's just the shadows. Those words should have been your first warning, but you ignored them. The night of your arrival, the sky was a bruised purple, the sun slipping away too fast behind thick clouds. You reached the cabin just as twilight bled into darkness, a chill creeping across your skin. The air smelled of damp earth, moss, and something else, something that didn't belong. When you unlocked the door, a strange odor escaped. It was faint but unmistakable, a mixture of old wood, rotting leaves, and an undercurrent of something metallic like blood. You shrugged it off as a product of the isolation, assuming that no one had stayed there in a while. The wooden floor creaked beneath your feet as you entered, and the faint sound of something scraping against the walls sent a shiver down your spine. It didn't feel like a place meant for comfort. Felt watched. The house was cold, unnaturally cold. Even with the fireplace burning, the heat barely seemed to reach you. You checked the thermostat, no luck. It was as though the house itself was rejecting warmth, as though it had been long forgotten by time. The furniture was sparse, the walls adorned with strange, aged paintings. The air felt dense, suffocating, as if something unseen was pressing against your chest. You attempted to brush it off, chalking it up to your own paranoia. After all, it's just an old house. But then you heard it. A soft, persistent whisper like the wind. But there was no wind. It came from nowhere, as though it was inside the walls. At first, it was almost imperceptible, but then it became clearer. A voice, low and slithering, calling from the dark corners of the room. Don't stay too long. You froze. Your blood ran cold. The air seemed to bend around the words, as though the room itself had a presence. Oh wait, it was wrong. This wasn't the normal isolation of a cabin in the woods. There was something living here, something old. A sudden knock on the door shook you from your thoughts. You blinked, confused. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? With a hesitance you couldn't explain, you opened it. No one was there. You stepped outside, the darkness swallowing you whole. The only sound was your heartbeat pounding in your ears, the rustle of leaves in the trees, and a sound from behind you. You spun around, the door creaking closed, but there was nothing. The whisper came again, this time louder. You shouldn't have come. Your breath hitched in your chest, eyes darting to every corner of the yard, but all that met you was the inky black void of the forest beyond. It felt as though eyes were following you from every direction, watching with patient, predatory hunger. Suddenly the lights flickered. And then, for a moment, everything went silent. It was then you realized, the house was alive, not in the way you'd think, but in a way far worse. It was breathing, watching, waiting. The door slammed behind you, the house locking you in. You turned the handle. No luck. The windows were sealed tight and the air was growing thicker, heavier. You were not alone. As you glanced around the cabin, the paintings on the walls no longer seemed static. They shifted, their eyes following your every move. And the whispers grew louder, no longer vague but clear. Words you couldn't quite understand, but the tone was unmistakable. A warning. A curse. Leave while you still can. But the door wouldn't open. And the darkness inside the house was no longer just the absence of light. It felt like something was reaching out from it. A presence. Something that had been waiting for you. And that was when you saw it. Through the crack in the floorboards, the reflection of something in the shadows. It was watching you. Something ancient. Something hungry. If you think you can handle more, be sure to subscribe. But be warned, once you hear the rest, you may never be alone again. The worst is yet to come. Do you feel it? That coldness creeping over your skin? That unsettling presence lurking in the darkness? There's no escaping it now. You thought you could leave. You thought it was just a story, just another horror tale that was meant to be feared but never truly lived. But now the fear is inside you, settling deep into your bones, twisting in your gut. You can't shake it. You can't escape it. It's too late for that now. The house had changed. It was no longer just a building, it was alive in ways that you couldn't comprehend. The shadows seemed to stretch longer now, thicker, as if the walls themselves were drawing closer, squeezing you into a corner where no light could escape. Every movement you made felt wrong, like the house was watching, reacting, waiting for your next mistake. The whispers had escalated. They were no longer distant, faint murmurs, but sharp, clear voices. They moved with the creaks of the wooden floor, the groan of the beams overhead. It was as if they were speaking through the house itself, through you. Don't try to leave. You will never leave. The voice was no longer a whisper, but a hiss. An echo in your head that made your skin crawl. You wanted to scream. You wanted to fight, to run. But your legs wouldn't move. It was as though they were bound by the very air itself, held in place by an unseen force. The door had locked on its own. You tried the windows, they were sealed tight, the glass thick with grime. You banged against them, but the house refused to let you out. The floorboards beneath your feet creaked as though something moved just under them, something far older and far more powerful than you could understand. A cold, wet breath brushed against your neck. You turned quickly, your heart slamming against your chest. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence that had come to dominate the house, thick and suffocating. You backed away from the wall, desperate to find any exit. That's when you noticed it, a door at the back of the cabin that had never been there before. You were certain of it. It wasn't in the listing photos, and it wasn't there when you first walked in. Yet there it was. A heavy wooden door, worn by age and covered with carvings that seemed to shift when you looked at them. You reached for the handle. It was ice cold, as though the very thing behind it had been waiting, watching for your touch. The air around you seemed to pulse in rhythm with your heartbeat, as though something was drawing nearer. Taking a deep breath, you turned the handle. The door creaked open slowly. What lay behind it wasn't another room, but a passage. A narrow, cramped corridor that extended down into the depths of the earth. You could feel it, the deep, suffocating pressure of something ancient, something alive, waiting in the dark. The stench was unbearable now. A mix of decay and blood, old and fresh, as though something had been feasting in the darkness for centuries. It was then that you saw them, the eyes. Thousands of them, glowing faintly in the blackness of the passage, like a sea of tiny embers. They stared at you with a hunger so intense, so primal, that you could almost taste it on your tongue. And then you heard it. A low, guttural laugh that vibrated through your very soul. You shouldn't have opened the door. The voice came from everywhere. It rumbled beneath the earth, rose through the walls, echoed in your head. You couldn't escape it. The laughter wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, a force, an entity that had been waiting. It had been waiting for you. Your breath quickened. Panic surged through you, but your body felt like lead. You couldn't move. Your feet were glued to the floor as if the house itself was holding you captive, making sure you understood, there was no way out. The shadows, those black, unnatural shadows that filled the passage, seemed to stretch and twist, reaching for you, grabbing at you. Then, as if in response to your fear, the eyes in the dark blinked, one after another. In unison. A cold, invisible hand wrapped around your throat, squeezing, tightening. The darkness grew deeper, swallowing the light, swallowing everything. And in the pit of that darkness you saw her. Madeline. The woman from the listing. But this wasn't the same kindly old woman who had welcomed you. This woman had a face twisted with malice, her eyes empty pits, her skin pale as bone. She floated just above the ground, her mouth contorted into an expression of pure, unrelenting rage. Her voice, when she spoke, wasn't her own. You woke it. You disturbed it. The air was growing thick, heavy with something ancient and foul. She stepped closer, her presence crushing, as though the very space around you was being devoured by her. It has waited so long, so very long. And then, with a sudden jarring movement, her eyes snapped open wide, too wide as though the sockets themselves were splitting apart. The house began to tremble, the walls groaning as if the foundation was shifting beneath you. The very house, no, the land itself, was alive with something far older than time, something that had been buried beneath the earth and had been waiting for you. Suddenly, everything clicked. The reason the cabin had felt wrong, the reason the reviews were perfect, too perfect. This wasn't just a house. This was a trap, a cursed living entity, and you had unwittingly stepped right into its jaws. The ground beneath you split open, and from the crack, the darkness poured in. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was alive. It was hunger. It was death. And as it rose, you could feel it pulling at your skin, your soul, ripping at the very essence of who you were. And then, through the noise of your desperate screams, a whisper, "You will never leave." The last thing you saw was Madeline's smiling face, too wide, too twisted, and her voice in your ear. "Welcome to your new home." And in that final moment, as you felt yourself disappear, you realized, this place wasn't a cabin. This place was the beginning. And it was far older than anything you could have ever imagined. And now it's too late. The house knows you. It knows who you are. And it's watching. Waiting. So, as you sit there, as you finish this story, you might think that you're safe. That you can walk away, close your eyes, and sleep in peace. But the whispers are already starting in your ear. And somewhere deep in the dark, you can feel something reaching out for you. Do you feel it now? That weight on your chest? That presence? It's not over. It's just begun. So you better subscribe now, before it's too late.